Currently, he's considered to be, some say, the most powerful House Speaker in the nation because of veto-related issues related to Governor Cooper, which is the North Carolina governor currently. It was filed by former Apex Town Council member Scott Lassiter, alleges that House Speaker Tim Moore broke up his marriage by enticing his wife into an affair. So I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I've not been to law school, but basically North Carolina is one of 6 states, is my understanding, in the nation with these types of laws. This alienation of affection, criminal conversation type of law evidently was created over 200 years ago when women were considered to be property of their husbands and could be, essentially the thought was, stolen away by another man. And this law was designed to compensate the husband for loss of property, essentially. Over the years, in the early 1900s, as I understand it, and possibly the late 1800s, it was amended to include women to be able to sue other women for alienating the affection of their husbands, basically, and to be able to recover damages, potentially. So the law is a really, really ancient law. It is an antiquated law. There was a lawyer there's been a number of lawyers that have been interviewed from different family law firms across North Carolina about this. One of the lawyers had said that they didn't know exactly how many of these lawsuits are filed every single year because up until the court system existed, there was no way to really track it without going straight to the courthouse and manually collecting it up, which would take forever if you went county by county to each courthouse and tried to do that. But he estimated that it was between 300 to 500 of these types of cases are filed each year. So most of them don't make the news the way this does. Every now and again they do. The reason this one is so significant is because it involves a high-profile, powerful political figure, and the allegations that are made are really serious. Some are saying that they think that it warrants a criminal investigation in order to determine whether or not the allegations are true, and if so, appropriate legal action being taken. I would agree with those individuals. I've had some time to really think and contemplate about that, and I would agree with that sentiment 100,000%. The lawsuit says that the relationship went on for more than 3 years, and then it goes on to basically talk about the details. It says that, his wife, Jamie Lyles Lassiter, feared that breaking it off could cost her job as executive director of the North Carolina Conference of Clerks of Superior Court. Again, these are all allegations in a pending complaint, aka lawsuit, in Wake County, North Carolina right now. This has not gone into discovery or trial. Who knows if this lawsuit will go anywhere. More than 90% of lawsuits in America are just basically settled out of court. There's a lot of non-disclosure agreements. It's really shady in America, the American legal system. I don't trust it. And I sure as heck don't trust the North Carolina legal system at all. In an interview with Charlotte television station WBTV on Tuesday, Moore acknowledged that he had a sexual relationship with the Lyles Lassiter, and then, quote, "but I thought it was appropriate because she was separated and I was divorced." Lyles Lassiter issued a statement saying there was no affection for her husband to be alienated from. She said she has long been separated from her husband and that the lawsuit was a vindictive act by an estranged spouse. But Lassiter's attorney, Alicia Journey, and I looked up this attorney actually on the website and read more about alienation, affection, and criminal conversation on this family law website, and learning way too much about this topic now, told the News and Observer that the Lassiters had not separated until January 11th, 2023, and quote, "no separation agreement has been signed," end quote. So one of the claims that is being made by the public statements being released in this case is that they were separated, that there was a separation. And the husband's attorney is claiming the opposite. Lassiter's attorney, Alicia Journey, told the News and Observer that the Lassiters had not separated until January 11th, 2023, and quote, no separation agreement has been signed. So that's what his attorney is saying. All right, so this one is from CBS17.com, the local news station, and the title is Capitol Report, Many Argue It's an Antiquated Law, NC House Speaker Urges State to Repeal Alienation of Affection Law. Okay, so the reason this is so consequential is because this person, the North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore, is a Republican, and this party, for the entire time that I've been anywhere knowing about North Carolina and its politics and policies on any level, any way, shape, or form, has been very, very clear that they are all about family values and the sanctity of marriage. And that's what the alienation of affection and criminal conversation laws basically are all about. Again, not a lawyer, I've been in law school, but that is my understanding, okay? And politically, this is what they espouse. So it is a total 180 for the North Carolina House Speaker to be like, oh, now I want to repeal the alienation of affection law right away. And so I'm going to go ahead and direct quote exactly what he's now claiming, because I want to make sure I don't misquote him. You know, he's flat denying everything in the lawsuit, the complaint. He's making tons and tons of stuff about that, tons of statements that he denies it. And so does the wife involved in the situation. This is what he's quoted saying. Speaker Moore said he plans to file a countersuit against Scott Lassiter and also so the countersuit, if that gets filed, I will also be looking at that as well. So far, the last I checked, which was, I think the wee hours of this morning, was sometime today, in the wee hours of the morning, there had been nothing new had been filed with the Wake County E-Court. If something new is filed, I will be looking for it. I was having technological issues with the North Carolina E-Court website, so I don't know how fast I'd be able to access it. I guarantee you everyone, their mothers, could probably be on this. He also said he believes the state's alienation of affection law should be eliminated. North Carolina is one of only a few states where such a law exists. Evidently the number is 6. We're one of 6 states. And then he's quoted as, North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore is quoted as saying, quote, as someone who is now the victim of this lawsuit, absolutely, I think we should repeal it. Okay, let me repeat that again. North Carolina House Speaker is quoted as saying by CBS17.com, local news, quote, as someone who is now the victim of this lawsuit, absolutely, I think we should repeal it. So this is a total and complete hysterical to me, amusing 180, in my opinion. Not unless I'm missing something, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's a part of a political party that stands on sanctity of marriage. Okay, that's what they say, sanctity of marriage and family values. And that is what the law in the modern day era is supposed to be based upon. Protecting family values, protecting marriage rights, basically, essentially. And now their own party leader, the speaker, he's like, never mind. We need to get rid of that immediately because I have a legal problem. And if we get rid of that law and get rid of what my legal problem is, basically what it communicates to me. And look, I'm just going to tell you right now, like, I'm not buying what's being sold by North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore or the women involved in the situation whatsoever. They've released public statements. They're denying everything. They have made their own claims. I don't believe them. I don't believe them. That's my opinion. That's my opinion. That's my takeaway. Again, these are allegations. They are not substantiated. They have not been to discovery. They've not been to jury trial. There has been no criminal investigation into any of this. There may never be. Due to how well connected this person, North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore, is, I don't think that there ever will be, to be completely frank with you. I'm surprised that these allegations ever made the light of day in the first place. And the husband involved is also alleging that there was attempts to suppress his allegations from becoming public. And I will get into that. It is a deep dive, and I'm going to cover every single minute of it. I have really been planning for this, to really get this information out there because I really think it's important. One of the other leaders that's a Republican, Senate leader, Phil Berger, declined this week to weigh in on the specifics of Moore's case, but he did say he disagrees with the idea of repealing the law. Quote, I just think that there is some respect for marriage in the common law torts and that it's something that I don't see a need to eliminate, end quote. That's what Senate Leader Phil Berger he said. And so he's sticking by his own values that he espouses, regardless of the drama, which is exactly what it is, that is being faced by North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore right now. I sincerely hope that more information comes out, that there's meaningful investigation into all of this, because I really think that there needs to be. And I'm really concerned that that won't happen and that this is just going to just kind of disappear. Now, this next clip right here is a clip that is really important. It has a political correspondent here in North Carolina who's got some really good insight, in my view, of the situation. And he brings up valid points that literally no one else is bringing up about the situation. Because to me, this isn't about so much an affair as it's about the issues that he's going to talk about here in a second. And he phrases it and says it in a way better than I feel like I ever could.
Allegations in the lawsuit are true. This is unprecedented in North Carolina politics.
That's Dan McCorkle, a Democratic political strategist in Charlotte. In the lawsuit, Scott Lassiter claims his wife, Jamie Lyles Lassiter, and Moore started their affair in or around 2019, and it continued through and beyond January of this year. Lassiter says he started surveilling his wife this past December after hearing rumors. In the lawsuit, Lassiter claims Jamie told him she was going to a movie with a friend, but when he followed her, she went to dinner with Moore and then back to Moore's house.
So I'd also like to point out something. I have not looked up the ages of these two people, but I've just been giving this a lot of thought. And tell me what you think. Does this guy, in my opinion, I think that this man, the House Speaker, looks substantially older than this woman here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, if I'm wrong, like, just let me know. Like, tell me. I have not looked at the ages of these people. I'm trying really hard to just be very fair, very balanced, very respectful of everyone in this really high-profile, contentious, explicit type of situation going on out here in North Carolina. But I really think this man looks substantially older than this woman here. And by all accounts, he is the most powerful person in politics in North Carolina right now. And this woman is not. So there's like a position of power here that is pretty blatant, in my opinion, and that is being pointed out by many people. And that alone brings up a lot of thoughts and questions and thoughts, which this wonderful person, this man, is going to actually talk about more.
Lassiter said Jamie didn't come home until the next day, and that's when he confronted her. Lassiter claims Jamie said she feared ending the affair with Moore would result in her losing her job at the NC Conference of Clerks.
If any of this is true, it's textbook sexual harassment, favors for jobs. Not only that, if you don't do this, you may lose your job. I mean, that goes beyond any kind of personal affair, especially as it involved government employees.
Just mentioned here, this man is really important because he is pointing out abuse of power and of position, potentially, if these allegations are true. People aren't really focusing on that, and he even mentioned, like, he called it textbook sexual harassment. Look, I don't know what the hell textbook sexual harassment really consists of. I'm not going to even try to get into that again. I'm not aware. I have not been to law school, period. But he's pointing out some really interesting stuff where it's like, okay, yeah, there's this legal thing going on. It's a complaint, aka lawsuit, pending right now in Wake County Court about this married couple, legally married couple, with alienation, affection, criminal conversation law. Okay, but then there's this, that's like the tip of the iceberg, in my view, and the views of many people, which is why this is such a big story. There's all these layers underneath it, and the layers underneath it is, you got this North Carolina House Speaker in his huge position of power. You have this other person who's like arguably a subordinate. I mean, he seems to be, his statements, I have a lot of problems with the House Speaker's statements that he's making to the public, so I'm trying really hard to avoid even commenting on that too much, aside from what I've shown and that's quoted in the news and I'm able to show. I don't believe what's being said by the House Speaker, if I'm being brutally honest. And I think that his position, and regardless of the woman's marital status, I think his position and her position and this relationship are highly problematic and extremely questionable.
A few days after finding out about the affair, Lassiter said he confronted Moore at a Biscuitville in Raleigh, and Moore admitted to having a sexual relationship with Lassiter.
Okay, so this Biscuitville, I will be going to this shortly. I'm literally going to the exact same Biscuitville news clip. And this Biscuitville now has become the topic of a national news article regarding people that were like in politics and lawyers going to local Southern food chains and doing things they're not supposed to be doing. So it was a funny article I read that included this chain. This chain's actually getting a lot of free advertising now because of all this. And one of their their online reviews, it stated, a person did, "Oh, this is the place where such and such met such and such, the House Speaker, da 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 da," and put it all in there and gave them like 5 stars for being the location. And the Biscuitville location, they actually responded and were like, "Thanks. We're so grateful to have raving fans like you." And so I will be going to this Biscuitville. No, I'm not kidding. And I'm going to be taking pictures and posting them on social media. I looked at their menu. It looks delicious. I've never been there before. Heard of it in passing. And the reviews, people are very quite happy with them overall. So looking forward to trying out Biscuitville, the meeting location for the situation.
Jamie. Lassiter also claims Moore offered to help him in, quote, any way he could politically towards the end of their meeting.
Speaker Moore was literally one of the most powerful speakers of the House in the nation. With Governor Cooper not having veto power, Speaker Moore was literally at the apex of his influence and power with the North Carolina General Assembly. And to have this happen, this is going to upset, as they say, upset the apple cart in an unprecedented way.
Before things, due to Moore's success for the Republican Party throughout the last few months, Republican voters will more than likely look past this scandal and the allegations come 2024. But he's not sure he can say the same for unaffiliated voters.
Unaffiliated voters are, of course, the number one voters in Mecklenburg and North Carolina, and they are not as staunch. As a Democrat, I'll vote for a yellow dog. Republicans, they'll vote pretty much for a Republican. It's that middle ground that decides elections now.
Well, Jamie Lassiter released a statement saying, in part, quote, Scott has serious mental health and substance abuse issues, which I can only assume led him to file this outrageous and defamatory suit. Well, the claims are not only false, but impossible, as we've been separated with a signed separation document for years, end quote. You can find the rest of her statement on our website at qcnews.com. Representative Moore also released a statement calling the lawsuit baseless.
Very controversial, to say the very least. Very contentious topics here. Factual background. On June 1st, 2013, plaintiff, this is the husband, the plaintiff, was lawfully married to Mrs. Lassiter. And plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter, collectively the Lassiters, lived continuously together as husband and wife in North Carolina from June 1st, 2013 until they separated from each other on or about January 11th, 2023. As a result of defendant Tim Moore's adulterous extramarital relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter met in college and had been in a relationship with each other for more than 10 years at the time of their separation. Defendant Tim Moore willfully interfered with the marital relationship between Mrs. Lassiter and plaintiff, while plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter were happily married and living together in Wake County, North Carolina. At the time, defendant Tim Moore began pursuing I redacted this due to explicit content, relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Defendant Tim Moore was aware that plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter were happily married to each other and living together. In support of this allegation, plaintiff shows the court as follows. Defendant Tim Moore and Mrs. Lassiter worked together in her capacity as the executive director of the NC Conference of Clerks. Mrs. Lassiter frequently interacted with defendant Tim Moore to advocate for her organization. A photo of defendant Tim Moore and Mrs. Lassiter together at work event in December 2022 is attached here too as Exhibit B and incorporated by reference herein. Again, I'm not covering the exact picture exhibits. That's a bit much for me, but they are publicly available. And I think I showed this already. Some of the exhibits I did in news articles that were covered in newscasts. Upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore saw Mrs. Lassiter consistently wearing a wedding band from the time that they began working together prior to 2017 through January 11th, 2023. C. Plaintiff Mrs. Lassiter and defendant Tim Moore are all actively involved in the North Carolina Republican Party. Then they have the acronym for that. The Lassiters attended many NCGOP functions as a couple and often interacted with defendant Tim Moore at these events. As recently as December 12th, 2022, defendant Tim Moore attended a holiday dinner at, I redacted the name, of Raleigh, North Carolina with the Lassiters and other guests. Plaintiff Plaintiff Mrs. D, plaintiff Mrs. Lassiter, and defendant Tim Moore have all been, I redacted this, basically social media, friends for more than 5 years. During the time that defendant Tim Moore has been, I redacted the name of the social media company, social media friends with plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter. The Lassiters frequently posted photos of themselves as a couple, basically saying they posted themselves as a couple on social media is the allegation. E, defendant Tim Moore accepted campaign contributions from both plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter for his North Carolina House of Representatives election campaigns. Beginning in 2019 and continuing through and beyond January 11th, 2023, defendant Tim Moore aggressively pursued I forgot to redact that one, you can see it right there, what it is, I'm not going to say it, a blank relationship with Mrs. Lassiter, even though he knew that she was married to and living with plaintiff. Plaintiff discovered defendant Tim Moore's affair with Mrs. Lassiter on December 21st, 2022. After hearing persistent rumors about an inappropriate relationship between defendant Tim Moore and Mrs. Lassiter, which Mrs. Lassiter had repeatedly denied, plaintiff surveilled Mrs. Lassiter on the evening of December 21st, 2022, the Wednesday before Christmas and the beginning of her holiday vacation from work. She had told plaintiff that she was going to a movie with one of her female friends. Instead of going to a movie, Mrs. Lassiter went to dinner with defendant Tim Moore at, I redacted the name of the steakhouse, in Raleigh, North Carolina. After dinner, defendant Tim Moore drove Mrs. Lassiter in the Lassiter's car to his residence in Raleigh, where they spent hours together and upon information and belief had, I redacted the explicit content. A photo of defendant Tim Moore and Mrs. Lassiter leaving, I redacted the name of the steakhouse, together at approximately 11 p.m. that evening is attached here to as Exhibit C and incorporated by reference herein. Okay, so that's another one of the exhibits that was actually shown in the newscast I already covered, and it talks about or shows this picture alleging him and her leaving the steakhouse together on a particular evening. Which I find interesting, the whole surveillance aspect of this. Okay, but it just gets honestly stranger from here. When Mrs. Lassiter returned home in the early morning hours of December 22nd, 2022, much later than she had told plaintiff she would be out for the movie, plaintiff confronted her about her relationship with defendant Tim Moore. Mrs. Lassiter tearfully confessed that she had been involved in an extramarital affair with defendant Tim Moore for more than 3 years. That she had engaged in, I redacted explicit activity with defendant Tim Moore, including, I redacted explicit activity, with other individuals seeking defendant Tim Moore's political favor, and that she feared ending the relationship with defendant Tim Moore would result in losing her job. Plaintiff insisted that defendant Tim Moore meet with him. So the husband insisted that defendant, the House Speaker Tim Moore, meet with him at this is going to be the Biscuitville. So plaintiff could confront him about the affair with Mrs. Lassiter. On December 26, 2022, plaintiff and defendant Tim Moore, right after Christmas, plaintiff and defendant Tim Moore met at Biscuitville on Western Boulevard in Raleigh, North Carolina. I will be going to the Biscuitville here shortly and posting my picture on social media. I'm going to this Biscuitville. This Biscuitville is getting extra business. When plaintiff questioned defendant Tim Moore, he admitted to having a multi-year relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Near the end of the meeting, defendant Tim Moore asked plaintiff quote, on a completely unrelated note, end quote, if there was anything he could do for plaintiff, implying that he could use the power he held as speaker in some way to benefit plaintiff. Plaintiff angrily told defendant Tim Moore that he did not want any political favors. In the weeks following plaintiff's discovery of defendant Tim Moore's relationship with Mrs. Lassiter, the Lassiters attempted to work through the marital problems associated with Mrs. Lassiter's infidelity, including participating in religious and therapeutic counseling. Mrs. Lassiter was adamant that she wanted to save their marriage, but could not end her relationship with defendant Tim Moore for fear of retaliation. Mrs. Lassiter implored plaintiff to allow her to continue the relationship, so her job. Mrs. Lassiter implored plaintiff to allow her to continue the relationship, so her job an at-will position that is statutorily created and directly funded by the North Carolina General Assembly in the interest of the NC Conference of Clerks would not be adversely affected by defendant Tim Moore's anticipated displeasure over a potential breakup. Mrs. Lassiter begged plaintiff to understand that she had got herself into something she couldn't get out of. Got herself into something she couldn't get out of, referring to her relationship with defendant Tim Moore. Plaintiff told Mrs. Lassiter that they could not remain married unless she ended her relationship with defendant Tim Moore. Because Mrs. Lassiter said she was uncomfortable extricating herself from that relationship, plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter separated on January 11, 2023. First claim for relief, criminal conversation. Paragraphs 1 through 12 above are hereby re-alleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. Upon information and belief beginning in or around 2019, continuing through and beyond January 11, 2023, defendant and Mrs. Lassiter were physically intimate, including redacted explicit content in North Carolina on multiple occasions at locations that include but are not limited to the following: defendant Tim Moore's condominium in the redacted the personal address of this person. Raleigh, North Carolina, I redacted the zip code of this personal address for this person. And defendant Tim Moore's condominium located at, also redacted, the personal address of this person. Raleigh, North Carolina, I redacted the personal zip code of the address for this person. Again, all of the redacted information is still publicly available, but I just made the choice to do that. Between 2019 and January 11, 2023, defendant knowingly and willingly engaged in redacted explicit content with Mrs. Lassiter in North Carolina while plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter were lawfully married and not separated. Plaintiff has been injured by defendant Tim Moore's adulterous extramarital relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Plaintiff's damages include but are not limited to the loss of support and companionship of Mrs. Lassiter, humiliation, injury to his reputation, and mental anguish resulting from the destruction of his marriage. Plaintiff has been damaged by defendant Tim Moore's adulterous extramarital relationship with Mrs. Lassiter in an amount in excess of $25,000. So this is going to be getting into like kind of money, the legal money stuff here. And this is actually like towards the end. This is another reason I kind of cut off a huge chunk of this complaint, because it just gets into like all this money stuff. And it's like, I really don't care to cover all the money stuff. I mean, you can see here, the civil suit includes requests for damages, basically involves money. So you can see that. Second claim for relief, alienation of affections. Paragraphs 1 through 17 above are hereby re-alleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. Prior to defendant Tim Moore's extramarital relationship with Mrs. Lassiter, plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter were happily married and genuine love and affection existed between them. Upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore committed the following acts in North Carolina during the time period from 2019 through January 11, 2023, which acts were designed to alienate Mrs. Lassiter from plaintiff. Defendant Tim Moore used his position as Speaker of the North Carolina House of Representatives to initiate contact and develop a personal relationship with Mrs. Lassiter, despite knowing that she was married to plaintiff. Defendant Tim Moore engaged in, I redacted this, with Mrs. Lassiter on many occasions over multiple years, despite knowing that Mrs. Lassiter was married to plaintiff. Defendant Tim Moore convinced Mrs. Lassiter to engage in degrading, I redacted this explicit content with him, including, I redacted this explicit content with others over whom he had power or influence. Defendant Tim Moore called and sent text messages and emails to Mrs. Lassiter, including with his state government phone, when he knew that she was home with plaintiff in order to interfere with Mrs. Lassiter's time with her husband and alienate her from plaintiff. Defendant Tim Moore persuaded Mrs. Lassiter to lie to plaintiff regarding her whereabouts so that she would sacrifice time with plaintiff to spend time with him. Defendant Tim Moore made statements to Mrs. Lassiter that caused her to believe her job and the position of the NC Conference of Clerks would be adversely affected if she ended their relationship. Defendant Tim Moore's wrongful and malicious acts deprived plaintiff of Mrs. Lassiter's love, society, companionship, and consortium, and proximately caused the marital separation of plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter. As a result of defendant Tim Moore's wrongful and malicious actions, the genuine love and affection that existed between plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter was alienated and destroyed. Plaintiff has been injured by defendant Tim Moore's wrongful and malicious acts, which resulted in the destruction of his marriage to Mrs. Lassiter. Plaintiff has been damaged by defendant Tim Moore's alienation. Okay, this talks about money. All right, so third claim, skipping ahead now. Third claim, civil conspiracy. Paragraphs 1 through 24 above are hereby re-alleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. Upon information and belief, a conspiracy existed between defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe to commit wrongful, malicious acts to interfere with plaintiff's rights to exclusive use, possession, and control of his real and personal property, and to intrude upon plaintiff's seclusion as set out below in paragraphs 32 through 51. Okay, so gets like extra weird. If it wasn't already weird enough now, this gets extra weird. Because basically what we're about to get into, which I've already read this multiple times, I've skimmed it, read it fast, read it slow, analyzed it. All right, so what we're about to get into is there's claims being made about this John Doe person, and there's pictures of this John Doe person in the exhibits, and it's so wild what we're about to talk about. So you see like this John Doe person, and there's like a camera in the property, and I'm going to cover it. Upon information and belief, a conspiracy existed between defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe to commit wrongful, malicious acts to interfere with plaintiff's rights to exclusive use, possession, and control of his real and personal property, and to intrude upon plaintiff's seclusion as set out below in paragraphs 32 through 51. Upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe had an agreement to engage in unlawful actions. Upon information and belief, defendants agree on a course of action to interfere with and intimidate plaintiff to prevent him from pursuing his valid legal claims against defendant Tim Moore. So this is the part where he's basically saying there's a conspiracy from the House Speaker and this unnamed man who's in this exhibit picture at the end of this, which I'm not even going to show, of this John Doe person, and that it was basically like a conspiracy to keep him from bringing forth these kinds of allegations in a public forum through a lawsuit. That is my understanding. Again, not a lawyer, not been to law school, but after reading this multiple times, looking at the newscast, that is my takeaway here. Again, these are allegations that are being made and not been substantiated, and they're being denied by the parties that they're, by House Speaker anyways. The John Doe person hasn't showed up yet. I don't know if he will. Okay, upon information and belief, defendants agree on a course of action to interfere with and intimidate plaintiff to prevent him from pursuing his valid legal claims against defendant Tim Moore. Upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore, either personally or through an agent authorized to act on his behalf, requested that defendant John Doe unlawfully enter upon plaintiff's real property, so I guess his personal residence basically is my understanding, and place a motion activated camera on plaintiff's property to capture photos and videos of plaintiff that defendant Tim Moore, the House Speaker guy, could use to persuade plaintiff not to pursue any of the valid legal claims against him, which now here it is in a public forum. In furtherance of defendant's agreements to engage in unlawful actions against plaintiff as set out herein below, defendant John Doe trespassed upon plaintiff's real property on multiple occasions, intruded upon plaintiff's seclusion, trespassed upon plaintiff's personal property, and converted plaintiff's personal property to his own personal use. Converted plaintiff's personal property to his own use. All right, next page. Defendant's wrongful actions pursuant to their agreement interfered with plaintiff's property rights and his right to privacy and cause damage to plaintiff as set out herein. Plaintiff has been injured by defendant's wrongful acts done in furtherance of their conspiracy, and defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe should be jointly and severally liable for the damage caused to plaintiff. Fourth claim, trespass to real property. Paragraphs 1 through 31 above are hereby re-alleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. At all times since January 11th, 2023, plaintiff has resided, I redacted the personal address of this person, a home that plaintiff formerly shared with Mrs. Lassiter. As the sole occupant of, redacted, since January 11th, 2023, plaintiff has been entitled to exclusive possession, use, and control of this property. Plaintiff has, and at all relevant times, has had either actual or constructive possession of redacted personal information. On multiple occasions, defendant John Doe made unlawful and unauthorized entries upon the property located at redacted, including but not limited to the following. At approximately 3:18 a.m., June 1st, 2023, so this is really recent, this allegation is being made. That was like literally this month. At approximately 3:18 a.m. on June 1st, 2023, defendant John Doe unlawfully and without authorization entered upon the property to surreptitiously install a motion-activated camera to capture photos and video recordings of plaintiff without plaintiff's consent. Defendant John Doe installed the camera on a tree in plaintiff's yard at an angle facing plaintiff's house so that it could, upon information and belief, capture photos and video recordings of events inside and outside plaintiff's home. On June 4th, 2023, also very recent allegation being made here, defendant John Doe unlawfully and without authorization entered upon the property, went onto plaintiff's porch, and looked around plaintiff's home without plaintiff's consent. Man, this is starting to sound like a Lifetime movie. It really is. They could make a movie about this. This is wild. At approximately 3:15 a.m. on June 7th, 2023, also this month, this recent allegation, defendant John Doe unlawfully and without authorization entered upon the property to retrieve the camera that he had installed on the property on June 1st, 2023. When plaintiff discovered the camera on his property and saw defendant John Doe installing it on his security camera footage, plaintiff replaced the camera installed by John Doe with a similar one of his own, plaintiff's camera, which was motion activated and connected to plaintiff's wireless network such that it would capture photos and video recordings and save them to cloud storage. Defendant John Doe realized that the camera he installed on plaintiff's property had been replaced, attempted to destroy plaintiff's camera, and then removed plaintiff's camera from the property. A photo of defendant John Doe taken by plaintiff's camera on June 7th, 2023 is attached hereto as Exhibit D and incorporated by reference herein. Okay, so I looked at Exhibit D. I'm not going to show you here. But I did look at it. It is this man's face, and it is just, it's literally kind of, I find it almost comical because it's like of this man's face. And he looks like he's in the bushes, but I guess I think it's like a tree or something. What did they say? Where did they say they put that camera at? Okay, I don't think they say a tree in here, but like the picture looked like he was fishing it out of a bush or a tree or something. As approximate result of defendant John Doe's unauthorized entries upon the land located at, I redacted this personal address. Fifth claim, trespass to personal property. Paragraphs 1 through 37 above are hereby realleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. Plaintiff has, and at all times has had, actual or constructive possession of plaintiff's camera. Without justification, authority, or lawful excuse, defendant John Doe interfered with plaintiff's right to possession of plaintiff's camera. Plaintiff has attempted through the Cary Police Department to regain actual possession of plaintiff's camera. Plaintiff has been damaged by defendant John Doe's trespass to his personal property. Sixth claim, conversion. Paragraphs 1 through 42 above are hereby realleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. At the time defendant John Doe came into actual possession of plaintiff's camera, plaintiff was the lawful owner of this property and was entitled to immediate possession of the property. Defendant John Doe converted plaintiff's camera to his own use. Defendant John Doe has excluded plaintiff from exercising his rights of ownership over his property and has either retained, destroyed, or disposed of plaintiff's personal property without authorization. Plaintiff has been damaged by defendant John Doe's conversion of his personal property. Paragraph's 7th claim, intrusion upon seclusion. Paragraphs 1 through 46 above are hereby realleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein. Upon information and belief, the motion activated camera installed by defendant John Doe at, I redacted the personal residence, on June 1st, 2023, was intended to capture photo and video recordings of plaintiff. Because the camera was installed on plaintiff's property, it was intended to capture photos and videos of private activities of plaintiff that would not be visible by the naked eye of an individual viewing plaintiff's property from a public area. Defendant John Doe's unauthorized attempts to capture photos and videos of plaintiff's private activities is a highly offensive invasion of plaintiff's privacy. Defendant John Doe's unauthorized attempts to capture photos and videos of plaintiff's private activities is Defendant John Doe's invasion of plaintiff's privacy constitutes an unlawful and tortious intrusion upon plaintiff's seclusion. Plaintiff has been damaged by defendant John Doe's invasion of his privacy. Plaintiff has experienced profound anxiety as a result of his discovery that defendant John Doe attempted to capture photos and video recordings of his private activities without his knowledge. Punitive damages. So we're getting towards the end here. This is going on the last page here shortly. Paragraphs 1 through 51 above are hereby realleged and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth here. And defendant Tim Moore engaged in willful and wanton conduct that was intended to interfere with, and did actually interfere with plaintiff's marital relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe engaged in malicious and willful and wanton conduct that was intended to interfere with, and did actually interfere with plaintiff's property rights and his right to privacy. Defendant Tim Moore had actual knowledge that Mrs. Lassiter was married to plaintiff, notwithstanding the fact that Mrs. Lassiter and plaintiff were married to each other. Defendant Tim Moore willfully pursued a, I redacted explicit information, relationship with Mrs. Lassiter for his own gain and with reckless disregard of the destruction he was causing to plaintiff's marriage. Defendant Tim Moore possessed an ill will towards plaintiff. Upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore resented plaintiff and was willing to engage in unlawful conduct through the hiring of and or cooperation with defendant John Doe to intimidate plaintiff and demonstrate defendant Tim Moore's power for reasons that include preventing plaintiff from asserting lawful claims against him. Additionally, defendant Tim Moore was furious at plaintiff because he believed that plaintiff's pursuit of his lawful claims against defendant Tim Moore could thwart defendant Tim Moore's political ambitions. In an effort to cover up defendant Tim Moore's unlawful conduct with Mrs. Lassiter, upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe willfully and wantonly interfered with plaintiff's property rights and right to privacy by entering upon plaintiff's property in the middle of the night and installing equipment intended to surreptitiously record plaintiff's private actions in his home. The actions of defendants described herein above were malicious, willful, and wanton, atrocious, and with reckless indifference to the rights and well-being of plaintiff. Plaintiff is entitled to recover punitive damages from defendant Tim Moore and defendant John Doe in accordance with North Carolina General Statute, and then it's listed what the statute is. Okay, so that is it. I'm done. I've covered it as much as I'm going to cover that. If there are more developments in this case, I will cover that as well. These are allegations. This is a pending complaint, also known as a lawsuit, in Wake County, North Carolina, against House Speaker, North Carolina House Speaker. The people, the John Doe has not been identified publicly and has not come out publicly that I'm aware of last I checked. I'm checking like the news on this constantly, like literally constantly. And so I'm very curious to see what updates are. I'm very curious to see what more does or doesn't happen with this. I'd love to see the allegations that are being made comprehensively investigated from all possible angles by the relevant authorities. I hope that will happen, but I seriously doubt it. I'll be really honest with you. I just don't trust the American legal system, and I really don't trust the North Carolina state legislature, and I haven't. The North Carolina legislature, my view of it is, and my view of North Carolina is, it's largely been a good old boy system. And I see signs and symptoms that that's changing, and I really hope that it does. To be clear, I have no party affiliation. I'm not affiliated with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party in any way, shape, or form. I've said on my social media many a time that I really disagree with the polarizing nature of politics in America. I find it to be toxic and poisonous. So I'm not affiliated with any political party. I feel like we need to get away from this two-party system and kind of branch out, and this whole us against them mentality and just the toxic, divisive, contentious nature of American politics is extremely problematic. And I don't trust it. And like I said, I have no party affiliation. I really want to see what happens in this case. And I've been studying very carefully North Carolina House Speaker Tim Moore's body language, and I don't trust it. I don't believe what he's saying. I don't approve of his sudden, in my opinion, and turn around 180 when you get rid of the alienation affection law. I previously was really against the alienation affection criminal conversation law. I really felt like it was against, because of the way it was created over 200 years ago, was about really oppressing women, essentially. The law was since modified to make it more equal, and women have been able to recover damages underneath the law. It's my opinion and belief that you cannot, as an adult, a fully functioning adult, cannot be alienated as described in this law. Like, I just personally just disagree with it. Like, I don't agree with it. I think it's antiquated and outrageous and whatever. But whatever the case, I really have conflicted feelings at this point about the alienation affection law in North Carolina and criminal conversation related law. I really feel like now this isn't the first time that alienation of affection lawsuit has been filed against a lawyer who has some kind of political involvement. I don't know how many times it's happened, but I know one of the times that happened was a number of years ago, and it was like, again, the tippy toppy of an iceberg. And that tippy toppy of the iceberg of the husband suing the lawyer over alienation affection affair that took place led to the revelation and uncovering of a lot of other illegal conduct, okay, within that iceberg. And it led to the lawyer being disbarred. And it led to them being exposed and to their political career that they were pursuing at the time being over. So this law is very strange law. It's very unique laws, and it has really evolved, and its evolution in recent years appears to be one where it can be very successfully utilized to potentially uncover and expose people that have been doing things they shouldn't be doing in positions of power. And I don't know how common it's being used in that way, but this is the second high-profile case I'm seeing involving a political person and a lawyer specifically. Again, these are all allegations. It's not been investigated at all, to the best of my knowledge, but I am keeping up with the news, and I will be paying close attention to what happens moving forward. But as of now, I don't think I want the alienation of affection criminal conversation laws repealed at all, especially since House Speaker Tim Moore wants that. I really don't want that. I don't want that at all. And if it wasn't for these laws, this lawsuit would never have happened. All these allegations that's not out in the open for you, I, and the whole world to see would never have come to light, most likely. So for that reason alone, I really don't want to see the repeal of these laws. All right. Bye.